The Garden of Converging Paths, a Zen story on how everything finds its meaning. The search begins. In the northern mountains of Japan, where cherry blossoms bloom briefly before the wind scatters their petals, lived a young man named Kenji. For years, he had been haunted by a question that kept him awake at night. Why does my life feel like a collection of meaningless events? Why does every experience seem disconnected from the rest? Kenji worked as an accountant in a small family business. His days passed between numbers and invoices, but at night, sitting in his small apartment, he gazed at the city lights and felt an emptiness he couldn't escape. He had lost his father as a teenager, failed in his first love, abandoned his dream of becoming an artist in favor of a more practical path, and now at 32, he felt like a stranger in his own life. One spring night, while wandering aimlessly through the damp streets after a light rain, Kenji stumbled upon a small temple he had never noticed before. A warm golden light glowed from its windows, and something inside seemed to invite him in. Inside, an old man with a white beard and eyes as deep as ancient wells was arranging flowers in a blue ceramic vase. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if every gesture carried a hidden meaning. "Good evening, young man," the old man said without looking up from the flowers. "My name is Takeshi. Are you here searching for something? Or running from something?" Kenji was startled by the directness of the question. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I think both." Master Takeshi smiled and finally lifted his gaze. "That is the most honest answer I've heard in a long time. Sit," he said, pointing to a meditation cushion. "Tell me what troubles you." Kenji felt strangely comfortable with this stranger. He spoke of his sense of disconnection, how every event in his life seemed isolated, without purpose, like puzzle pieces that never fit together. "Have you ever heard of the Zen concept of Enso?" Takeshi asked, picking up a brush and ink. With a single fluid motion, he drew an imperfect circle on rice paper. The Enso represents enlightenment, strength, elegance, the universe, and emptiness. But notice it's not a perfect circle. It's open. Kenji studied the circle. "Why is it open?" "Because perfection is an illusion," Takeshi replied. "The opening shows that nothing is complete, that everything is in constant change and motion. Your life, young Kenji, is not a straight line nor a closed circle. It is a living Enso." The next day, Kenji returned to the temple. Takeshi was waiting in the rock garden, carefully raking sand around stones placed seemingly at random. "Every morning I rake this garden," Takeshi explained. "Do you see these rocks? My teacher placed them here 50 years ago. For years, I thought their arrangement was arbitrary. Some looked too close, others too far apart. I was frustrated that they didn't follow any obvious pattern." Kenji studied the rocks. Indeed, they seemed to follow no geometric order. "But one day," Takeshi continued, "after years of contemplation, I saw something different. At sunset, from a certain angle, when the light touched them in just the right way, the stones cast the perfect shadow of a crane in flight. My teacher had not only considered the placement of the rocks, but also how light would shift over the years as the trees grew." Kenji walked around the garden, searching for the right angle. After several minutes, he found it. From one specific position, the shadows of the rocks indeed formed the silhouette of a crane soaring in the sky. "What once seemed meaningless," said Takeshi, "revealed its purpose when I found the right perspective at the right moment. Your life is like this garden. The events you think are disconnected are waiting for you to discover the angle from which they all connect." That afternoon, while they sipped green tea in silence, Takeshi began telling a story. Once there was a weaver who lost his sight in an accident when he was young. Crushed by despair, he thought his life as an artisan was over. But gradually, He developed such a refined sense of touch that he could create tapestries using only his hands. His early works after the accident were clumsy, imperfect. The colors clashed, the patterns looked chaotic. People pitied him and bought his work out of charity, not beauty. Years passed. The weaver kept working, not out of hope, but because it was the only thing he knew. His fingers grew more sensitive, his understanding of texture deeper. Slowly, his tapestries began to change. One day, an art collector visited his workshop. Seeing the recent pieces, he was stunned. "These are extraordinary," he said. "How do you create such intricate patterns without sight?" The weaver smiled. "I don't see the colors, but I feel how each thread vibrates with the others. I don't see the whole pattern, but I sense how each part must connect with the rest. Losing my sight didn't take away my art. It gave me a new way to create it." The collector then noticed something remarkable. Viewed in chronological order, from the accident to the present, the weaver's tapestries told the story of a transformation. The imperfect early works were not mistakes. They were the necessary foundation for his later mastery. Each tapestry was needed for the next one, the weaver realized. Even my failures were part of a greater design. Takeshi handed Kenji a simple notebook. "For the next few weeks, I want you to write about the moments in your life you consider lost or meaningless. But don't write as a victim. Write as if you were a detective, searching for clues in a greater mystery." Kenji began that very night. He wrote about his father's death, how it had forced him to grow up quickly and take on responsibilities others his age never faced. He wrote about his failed first love and how it had taught him vulnerability and emotional resilience. He wrote about abandoning art and how working with numbers had given him a different appreciation for patterns and precision. Every evening, Kenji visited the temple and shared his writings with Takeshi. The master listened in silence, occasionally asking questions that pushed Kenji deeper into reflection. "What would you have done differently if your father had not died?" he asked one night. "I probably would have been more irresponsible, more dependent," Kenji admitted. "How did your broken heart help you understand others?" "It made me more empathetic, more careful with people's feelings." "And what did your work with numbers give you that art never did?" "Discipline, patience, the ability to see beauty in structure and order." A rainy afternoon. One rainy afternoon, Takeshi invited Kenji to join a traditional tea ceremony. "Shinoyu," he explained, "is not simply about drinking tea. It's about connecting seemingly separate moments into one unified experience." As Takeshi prepared the tea with precise, meditative movements, he continued, "Every element of this ceremony has been refined over centuries. The design of the teapot, the temperature of the water, the angle of pouring, even the conversation we share. Everything is interconnected. What makes it more than the sum of its parts is the conscious intention to create harmony." Kenji watched as each gesture flowed naturally into the next. "It's like a dance," he murmured. "Exactly. Your life is also a dance. But you've been so focused on the individual steps that you haven't seen the choreography." After drinking the tea in contemplative silence, Takeshi asked, "What have you learned about yourself through writing in your journal?" Kenji thought carefully. "That every difficult experience prepared me for the next phase of my life. That my failures taught me as much as my successes. That the people who hurt me also showed me my own strength. And what else? That maybe there are no meaningless events. Maybe there are only events whose meaning I don't yet understand." Takeshi smiled deeply. "You are beginning to see, mapping a life. The next exercise will be different," Takeshi said the following evening. He spread a large sheet of blank paper across the table and placed several colored pencils on it. "You're going to draw a map of your life. but not chronologically. Instead, connect events based on how one led to another, regardless of when they happened. Kenji began hesitantly. He drew a small circle for his father's death, then connected lines to other events shaped by that loss. His early responsibility, his choice of a practical career, his fear of abandonment in relationships. Gradually, the map became more complex. Lines crossed and reconnected in unexpected ways. His accounting work had led him to Maya, a client who became his emotional mentor. Maya had introduced him to meditation, which had eventually led him to Takeshi's temple. "Look at this," Kenji said in amazement, pointing to the intricate web of connections. "If I hadn't lost my father, I wouldn't have chosen accounting. If I hadn't chosen accounting, I wouldn't have met Maya. And if I hadn't met Maya, I never would have come here." "And what does that mean to you?" asked Takeshi. "It means that even my most painful experiences were necessary. Not good, but necessary to bring me to where I am now." Lessons from the bamboo. The next day, Takeshi took Kenji for a walk through a bamboo grove near the temple. The wind made soft music as it swayed the tall green stalks. "Bamboo has a unique quality," Takeshi said as they walked. "It can bend almost to the ground without breaking." "Do you know why?" Kenji shook his head. "Because it's hollow inside. Its strength doesn't come from being solid, but from being flexible and empty. That emptiness allows it to move with the wind instead of resisting it." They stopped at a clearing where a particularly tall bamboo swayed gracefully. "Your times of confusion, of loss, of not knowing where to go," Takeshi continued. "Those are your moments of emptiness. In our culture, we fear emptiness, uncertainty. But emptiness is what allows movement, growth, transformation." Kenji touched a stalk of bamboo and felt its flexibility. "You're saying that my most difficult periods were actually opportunities?" "I'm saying they were spaces of possibility. When your life felt empty of meaning, it was really empty of old meaning, so it could make room for the new. The weight we carry." That night, as they gazed at the stars from the temple garden, Takeshi told another story. Two monks were traveling a mountain path after a heavy rain. They came to a swollen river where a beautiful young woman stood stranded, unable to cross without ruining her silk kimono. Without hesitation, the older monk lifted her onto his shoulders and carried her across. After setting her down, the monks continued on in silence. Hours later, the younger monk finally spoke. "Brother, how could you carry that woman? Our vows forbid us from contact with women." The older monk replied, "I left that woman on the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her?" Kenji reflected on the story. The younger monk was trapped in his interpretations of the past. "Exactly," said Takeshi. "And you've been carrying interpretations of your life's events that may have been wrong from the very beginning. You've been carrying the story that your life lacks meaning, when perhaps you just hadn't yet found the perspective to see it." The golden scars. The following week, Takeshi showed Kenji a beautiful ceramic vessel, its cracks repaired with golden veins running through it. "This is Kintsugi," he explained. "The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with liquid gold. The philosophy is that breaks and repairs are part of the object's story, not something to hide. In fact, the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken." Kenji examined the vessel closely. The golden lines created unique patterns that could never have existed without the original fractures. "Can you apply this to your own life?" asked Takeshi. Kenji thought of his journal, his map of connections, all the conversations of recent weeks. "My wounds, my failures, my moments of loss. They're not flaws to be hidden. They're part of what makes me who I am. The golden lines of my character. And what gold have you used to mend them? Wisdom, compassion, resilience. Every time I broke, I developed something new to repair myself. And each repair made me stronger, more aware. The mirror of still water. On his last day of formal teachings, Takeshi led Kenji to a perfectly still pond in the garden. So calm it reflected like a mirror. "Look at the water," said Takeshi. "What do you see?" "I see my reflection and the reflection of the sky." "Are they two separate things?" Kenji looked more carefully. "No, it's all one image. The boundary between my reflection and the sky's reflection is arbitrary. Your life and the universe work the same way. The events of your life are not separate from the greater context of existence. Your personal pain is part of universal pain. Your growth is part of cosmic growth. Your search for meaning is the universe itself trying to understand through you." Kenji sat quietly by the pond for a long time. Gradually, a deep understanding began to surface, not as a thought but as a recognition felt in the heart. "Everything makes sense," Kenji finally murmured, tears in his eyes. "Not because each individual event has a specific purpose, but because they all form part of a greater pattern. One that is more beautiful precisely because it includes both light and darkness." Takeshi nodded. "You have found your Satori, your moment of awakening. But remember, enlightenment is not a final state. It is a recognition that must be cultivated moment by moment." Kenji felt as if he were seeing his life for the very first time. Every painful experience had created emotional depth. Every loss had taught gratitude. Every confusion had prepared the ground for greater clarity. "I see that there are no separate events," Kenji said. "There is only a continuous flow of experience, like a river. Some parts are fast, others slow, some clear, others muddy, but it is all the same river." When Kenji returned to work the following week, his colleagues noticed a change. He was still the same meticulous accountant, but there was something different about his presence. A calmness, a deeper attentiveness. As he worked with numbers, Kenji began to see patterns he had missed before. Not only mathematical patterns, but human ones. He saw how his clients' expenses reflected their worries, their hopes, their fears. Their financial reports became stories of human life. One client, Mr. Yamamoto, had been struggling with debt for years. Kenji not only helped him reorganize his finances, but also offered a different perspective on his situation. "Mr. Yamamoto," he said during a consultation, "I've been reviewing your records over the last 5 years. Do you know what I see? I see someone who never stopped trying. Every month, even in the worst times, you made payments, no matter how small. That constancy is extraordinary." Mr. Yamamoto, who had come into the meeting feeling ashamed of his financial situation, straightened up a little. "I had never seen it that way. Your financial struggles don't define who you are," Kenji continued. "They are only a phase in your larger story. And based on what I see here, it is a story of perseverance." Months passed. Kenji continued to visit Takeshi, but now their conversations were between equals, exploring together the mysteries of conscious existence. "I've started to notice something interesting," Kenji shared one afternoon. "When I live with the understanding that everything is connected, synchronicities appear constantly. It feels as though the universe responds to my new way of seeing." Takeshi smiled. "It is not that the universe has changed. Your attention has changed. There were always patterns, connections, meanings, but now you have eyes to see them." Kenji had begun keeping a different kind of journal. Instead of analyzing past events, he wrote about the present. He observed how each encounter, each conversation, each small decision was an opportunity to act from his new understanding. On the subway, instead of losing himself in his phone, he observed people and silently sent them thoughts of kindness. At work, instead of simply completing tasks, he looked for ways to serve something greater than himself. At home, instead of feeling emptiness, he practiced gratitude for the solitude that allowed him to deepen his understanding. A year after his first encounter with Takeshi, Kenji received an unexpected proposal. Maya, his mentor, asked him to give a talk at a community center on finding purpose in difficult times. At first, Kenji resisted. "I'm not a spiritual teacher," he told Takeshi. "I'm barely beginning to understand these things myself." "That is exactly why you should do it," Takeshi replied. "The best teachers are eternal students. Speak from your experience, not from pretending to be an expert." On the night of the talk, Kenji was nervous. But when he began to speak about his journey, about his moments of despair and his gradual awakening, he felt a deep connection with the audience. "For years, I thought my life was a collection of meaningless accidents," he shared. "My father's death, my failed relationships, my abandoned dreams. But gradually I learned that I had been waiting for life to hand me a ready-made purpose, when in reality I needed to take part in creating meaning myself." A woman in the audience raised her hand. "But how did you find the strength to change your perspective when everything felt so hopeless?" Kenji reflected on the question. "I don't think it's about finding strength. It's about finding surrender. When I stopped fighting against my experience and began asking what I could learn from it, everything started to shift. Strength came naturally afterward." 2 years later, Kenji had transformed not only his own life but also his work. He had begun a financial consulting service with a holistic approach, helping people not only manage their money but also understand how their financial patterns reflected deeper emotional and spiritual patterns. One afternoon, while working in his new office, a young woman named Yuki came in seeking help with her finances. But it was obvious that her real need ran much deeper. "I feel completely lost," she confessed. "I'm 28 years old, and I feel like I've wasted my life. Every decision I've made seems to have been the wrong one." Kenji immediately recognized his own story in Yuki's words. With a compassionate smile, he asked, "Have you realized that acknowledging you feel lost is already the first step to finding yourself?" As he spoke with Yuki, Kenji understood that his own pain from years before had been transformed into wisdom that he could now offer to others. His story had not been a series of meaningless mistakes, but a preparation for this very moment. That night, Kenji visited Takeshi and told him about his encounter with Yuki. "It's extraordinary," Kenji reflected. "Everything I lived through, even the pain, now feels as though it was exactly what I needed to experience in order to help others who are going through something similar." Takeshi picked up a brush and drew another Enso, but this time the circle was almost complete, with only a small opening left. "Your understanding has matured," he said, "but notice that the circle is still open. There will always be more to learn, more to grow, more ways in which your experience can serve the world." Kenji looked at the circle and felt a deep peace. "I think I finally understand what everything makes sense really means. It doesn't mean that each individual event has a predetermined reason. It means that when we live consciously, we can find ways to use any experience, even the most difficult ones, to create something beautiful and meaningful." 5 years after Kenji's first encounter with Takeshi, the small temple had become a gathering place for people seeking a deeper way to understand their lives. Kenji, now married to Yuki, who had become his partner in both life and work, co-facilitated weekly reflection groups. One afternoon, as they were preparing the hall for a new session, Yuki remarked, "Isn't it interesting how people always arrive here exactly when they're ready to receive these teachings?" Kenji smiled, remembering his own first visit to the temple. "It's as if the universe has a perfect way of connecting people with what they need at the exact moment they need it." Takeshi, now in his 80s but still vibrant, overheard the conversation. "Have you considered," he asked, his eyes sparkling with humor, that perhaps you both entered your personal crises at exactly the right time, so you would be prepared to serve others in this way? The three of them fell silent for a moment, contemplating the vastness of that perspective. At that very moment, a new visitor entered the temple. She was a middle-aged woman with sad eyes and shoulders weighed down by some invisible burden. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I saw the light from the street and, I don't know why, but I felt I had to come in." Kenji, Yuki, and Takeshi exchanged glances filled with meaning. The dance of life, the eternal flow of teaching and learning, of healing and being healed, continued. "Please have a seat," Kenji said with genuine warmth. "Tell us what has brought you here tonight." And so, the circle of the Enso remained open, ready to include a new story, a new journey toward the understanding that, in the great tapestry of existence, everything, truly everything, makes sense when we learn to see it with the eyes of an awakened heart.